Giles Brown. Let's talk.
I'm delighted to say that I'm going to be speaking with Murfy Richards, who is the author of Innocent Bystander, Lessons from the Abyss, which is... It's just described as, and this is really intriguing, because normally when I get press notes for a book, they say so-and-so has done this, and they were in Liberia between 1975 and 1974, whatever, and it gives me a building block, if you like. With this one, this is so left field that I was trying to work out what exactly it is that Murfy gets up to. The book is called Innocent Bystander, Lessons from the Abyss, Adventures to the Edge of Mortality Through the lens of Risk and Consequences. Now that has got me intrigued. Good morning, Murfy. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me on. Really a pleasure to speak to you.
So whereabouts are you? It looks like you're in some sort of like lined bunker somewhere deep beneath the surface of the earth.
Yeah, padded cell here. I've actually returned to Kuwait. I'm doing some work here and consulting.
Right. So, Innocent Bystander, Lessons from the Abyss. I'm intrigued. What exactly is this about? Is it about your autobiography? Is it lessons to learn from life? What is it, please, Murph?
So what it is a series of short stories, essentially, of my own personal experience in the frame of risk and consequences. I've been in oil and gas and working in high-risk industries for a long time, so with a lot of the theory of it. And it really takes situations we find ourselves in by luck or happenstance and tries to put some theory around the critical thinking of how we got there, or how I got there, really, and the mistakes you make and how you come to terms with the issues you deal with in day-to-day life, right? So it's a little, as you say, it's quite hard to put it into a sentence. And I've been struggling with that myself.
But one of the things is, if you say so situations that we find ourselves in through happenstance and lucky stroke unlucky chance, and how we deal with them, and what we can, without going all sort of, he went on a journey and found himself. I mean, is that what we're looking at here? Because the first thing that leapt out of me, and you said you worked in the oil industry, and one of the first things that people our age will see, you see Piper Alpha and you go, oh, for goodness sake, that. So explain a little bit about that and how you relate to that situation.
So, well, in fact, one of the chapters is quite related to Piper Alpha. I was at college at the time of it. In fact, one of my college friends was on board the platform at the time. But also further than that, really, there were a couple of helicopter incidents, etc. So it was really very formative for me at the time. I was working offshore. I was doing a lot of travel, and really, that was my first experience of a major incident, right? In my oil and gas industry experience, I've also been involved in a terrorist attack in Al-Kabar in Saudi Arabia in 2004. I happened to be in Caracas at the time of the Vargas tragedy, where the mountainside slipped. I watched that happen out the window of an airplane sitting on the tarmac, and so in a lot of everybody's everyday life, you suddenly become involved in something that was larger than yourself and hard to comprehend. And really, this is just a series of these incidents and trying to come to terms with them in the context of managing critical thinking as it happens.
Here's the thing, though, because you mentioned in the oil business, right? And if you go to work on the rigs, a month on, a month off, or whatever, and you mention helicopters, and that's because people think, being stuck on an oil rig in the North Sea, that must be terrifying. I think what would be more terrifying is getting on a helicopter and flying over to that in the North Sea, because most of us don't have an idea what the North Sea is really like, because we just go as far north as we can and see the little waves breaking, and then you get out there and it is absolutely full on sort of otherworldly. So is your mind kind of conditioned, do we think? Do you pump yourself up, do we think? Do we mentally pump ourselves up to go into an environment like that? So you think to yourself, right, I'm going to do a 2-month tour or a 2 months, in somewhere at the ends of the earth. And so therefore your brain is conditioned to that. And there's two parts to this. As opposed to if you're sitting on an aircraft and suddenly the mountain next to you suddenly gives way, you got no warning of that.
Right. So what I think is you do it in two ways. One, you can approach it in that pumping yourself up way. Got to approach this. But I think more so what we do is we cheat ourselves with statistics. So if we take helicopter travel, right, or airplane travel, right, we think, the statistics are that it's the safest travel on Earth. But if you think of Vic Reeves, right, Vic Reeves said that 99.8% of statistics are made up on the spot, right? So when we're approaching that thing, we think big picture, we think statistics. But if you're traveling on a helicopter in third world conditions in Africa or in Russia or in the eastern states, and you look at the statistics of 40-year-old helicopters flying in Eastern Europe, your statistical playground is vastly different. So depending on how you look at the data will change how you perceive the risk and therefore what you deal with it, how you deal with it. In other situations where there's another area of the book where again offshore, where I opened a metal steel door and suddenly the room was full of oil and gas. There's a leaking pipe. And I was standing with a colleague and we had an immediate decision to make. Do we go? Do we withdraw? And in that situation, we ran at it. We closed the valve and we stopped the leak. So I think a lot of what I'm trying to write about is to try and bring the reader to that point, uncertain of which way they're going to go.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think, Murphy, is the fact that because when all hell breaks loose, basically, because most of us don't, unless we've been in the services, unless we've been in the blue, the blue lights or whatever, we don't have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. And we kind of think that there's going to be there's going to be theme music leading up to that point. There will be, hear me out. There will be signs, you will hear that, swelling or something. But the harsh reality is that if you've been in an accident, if you've been in a building or whatever, there is no theme music, there is no creaking, there is no da-da-da, and people looking at each other. It just happens then. And a lot of the reaction is to freeze because your brain can't handle it, and that perhaps is the worst thing you can do. And Murphy, like you just said, move basically. If you can, just start moving, because otherwise you might not be around to write the second chapter.
Well, what I would say is that I think for me, risk management is like a muscle, and you have to kind of exercise it. And it starts when you're a child, right? Climbing a tree, do I jump for that branch? If you don't, you fall and you hurt yourself. Or you make it and you succeed and your perception changes. I think one of the reasons I wrote it was because today, when I looked at my children growing up, they were stuck in their room. They see risk on the internet. It's not real world. You don't learn by cuts and bruises, and therefore your response isn't tuned by what you've learned in yourself, right? So when your initial reaction, I would say, based on my experience, having experienced a lot of these things, is in a complex situation, it's very hard to determine what the right outcome or the right action is in the first instance. And often staying still and using what you have at the right moment has more input than actually immediately running forward, back. The best solution often is to stay where you are and assess where you're going, And so a lot of the stories within the book are exactly that. It's to try and bring the person who's reading it into that situation and surprise them, but with the context of where they are. So I half expect half the time, half the readership would go, oh, don't do that. And the other half will be going, yes, you got to do that. But it's really about the personal experience that will drive your decision in that situation.
The book opens with, I think, is it you managed to put the family car in a ditch or something? So have you always been a risk taker, pushing the envelope, or is it just a situation that these sort of things kind of happened to you? Because you talk about your own kids growing and not because we're kids of the 70s, I think. So we used to go out and fall off a chopper or tomahawk bicycles on a regular basis, and that's how but we want to nurture our kids and protect them. But is there a line that we should actually say, otherwise you're never going to leave your rooms and you're going to get diabetes and you're never going to meet anybody sort of from outside your social circle? But do you think, were you always a risk taker, Murphy?
Well, I think I was always quite cavalier in my decision making. My daughter said to me, she said, you have questionable impulse control, Dad, she said once.
That is genius. That's got to be a T-shirt. You have questionable
impulse control.
Right, that's going on a T-shirt. Right, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so and I see it in my kids. The things that scare me most. My son, he's qualified in zoology and herpetology. He handles venomous snakes all the time, and it scares me to death. But in his experience, he's handled hundreds of them. He sees and he understands the body language of the snake. So I think it's a lot of that is that when you see something happening alongside you, everybody's going to have their own personal perspective of what that actually looks like, right? And who can say what's right and wrong if you're looking at somebody else and judging their actions or whether you're acting yourself? And so it's quite easy to seem reckless to other people if the other person doesn't understand the full context of what you're looking at. And I think that is really what I'm trying to get across.
If you think you're going into a situation, it could be physically risky, it could be something to do with your work, it could be just an emotional risk. Again, I'm not going down that whole beard one with your tractor bit, but what I'm saying is doing your background. Is that useful? I mean, if you go to a situation, if you're going to a new culture, if you're going to a new work environment or a new play environment, if you like, if you do even the minimum of background research, you can lay up the risks, you avoid the faux pas, you'll know the customs and the culture.
Yeah, I think absolutely. But at other times, you can't imagine the situation you'll find yourself in, right? I had a very close call on a balcony 12 stories up above the Bangkok streets where I nearly put myself over the edge. And the first thing I would say, and I think it's very important to say, is just because I've had a close encounter with suicide, I don't think I'm an expert, right? And so we have to be very careful about that. But 30 seconds or 5 seconds before the incident, I had no inkling that it was about to happen. And 5 seconds afterwards, I would have had absolutely no chance that I would have done it. But in that moment of where the emotion hit, it seemed like the most sensible thing in the world. And it was only through a mistake on my part that it didn't make it. I didn't manage to get myself over the edge. I tripped on the chair that I was about to jump off. But I think, it's very hard to put context around all the different situations you may find yourself in. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to get across is that even if you think you've got it nailed and you know where you are and what you're dealing with, I think there's always going to be that potential of a sort of reflex action, a nerve, a sort of like something striking a nerve that you would never have considered. So I think, understanding it from somebody else's perspective, and I think what I do is providing case studies of these situations to allow yourself to think it through beforehand. If you can imagine a situation before you ever encounter it, it's going to put you in a better position to be able to deal with it when it does.
Take the pause, perhaps. Take the second, take the step back, because a lot of us do stuff on impulse, especially with that thing you just said about. And if anybody's listening who's thinking about that, you're not alone, okay, listeners. So, sorry, Murphy. Go on.
If I may just say that I have never been a person who felt down on themselves, and even at the time when it happened, I was responsible for a multinational organization across a continent. I had 120 people reporting to me, and I was dealing with a lot of things. And right up until 5 seconds before, I was totally in control and knew everything. But that one moment where it was like somebody struck a nerve, it was just all too much, right? And so I think, we have to be very cognizant of that. And as I would say, equally, as to mirror what you said yourself, just because I've experienced it, it doesn't make me an expert. And just because you go and talk to people who have had that sort of experience, it is about going and talking to an expert at certain situations, right?
Indeed.
So that one, I'm very clear, very sort of echo your point there.
So when it comes to writing the book, you know, coming to the bit now, there's two things about the book. A, is it the kids saying put it down, or you thought I need to write this book, or you think I haven't written a book and that's an experience that I have to go through and really push the envelope?
I think, you know, I'd experienced a lot of things that I thought, you know what, that's pretty out there. I really should write it down.
Yeah.
But actually, it was a 1 in a million encounter in Brazil that made me actually start writing it, right? So, you know, this should talk. It's a complicated story. My mother was sick. I built a guitar in my garage. I went bankrupt. I sold the guitar. But 8 years later, I was in Rio and I happened to meet the guy who owned the guitar now, playing it on a stage. And it was actually him that told me, you know, you must write this down. I told him a couple of tales and he said, you've got to write that down. And that's what I did.
And also, there's a playlist now. We you know, as somebody who sits in a room, talks to himself and plays music for a living, because you've got specific ones. And I've got a rule. I never play. I don't like Mondays on a Monday because it's too hackneyed, so I won't do that. But you've got big country, you've got the jam, you've got the cult in there. So what's with the play? I mean, is the idea to put the playlist on whilst you are, to get you in the mood before or after or during?
So for me, it was really quite easy to put it together. But for me, it's sort of a background, eliminate the background noise that you have, right? A lot of people read on underground or with headphones in. And what I found was if I could just bring the music up to a level where I can almost hear it, but I can still concentrate on the reading. And then it sort of just helps with the setting and the environment, just gives another element, right? And I think what I learned by putting the playlist against the book was actually how important music is in terms of your mood and how it can, not only when you feel bad to put on a certain mood music, but how music can lead your mood. So if you are feeling in a certain way, you know, unhappy, but if you put on a different type of music that you have a relationship with, it will in fact lift your mood and help you deal with the problems you have, right? I'm not. Obviously, this works really well for radio, but I guess I'm nodding along with you there, Murphy. Yeah, exactly, no problem at all. What are you hoping that people will take from the book, apart from it being a rollicking good read, just in time for Christmas? Yeah, well, I hope they laugh. They laugh at my expense. I hope that they'll see the situations, and I've had a couple of comments where people say, you know what, that took me straight back to when I was doing this at that. You know, there's a lot of it is very, I think, experiential and experiences that we've all felt, car crashes, you know, things like that, and so. To learn a bit of the theory of the context of risk and consequence, what constitutes a risk and how you can manage it, but also to realize that, you know, everybody makes mistakes, right? And it's about getting up from them and how you get up from them that's going to make the difference overall.
And one final question: as a person whose mother was born in Glasgow, I cannot help but notice Sassenach is up there now. Yeah. I mean, that's not that. If I did something wrong, I was no longer her boy, but I was a Sassenach. So therefore, why has that made it? Why has that made it into the book at the top of the playlist?
So I think it's all broken out into roles. The whole book is certain roles at a time. At the top of the playlist, I moved from the southern counties of England up to the wilds of the north of Scotland when I was 8 years old, right? And back in the 70s, there weren't any English people there, and so, you know, you spent your time running away from people kicking you at school, and it just seemed appropriate. And but you know, to be fair, it's something that I've kind of had since then, right? As always feeling at home, although I've never really been at home.
The book is called Innocent Bystander, Lessons from the Abyss. It's by Murfy Richards, who we're talking to today. You can order it, listeners, by going to the TRE bookstore and clicking in the virtual bookshelf, that is, and clicking on the book, and it'll be winging its way to you. Murfy, if people want to find you online, do you do the social media thing? Is there a website for Innocent Bystander?
Yeah, there is. I'm at Murfy Richards on Instagram. And there is a website which will be live in the next couple of days, murphyrichards.com.
Brilliant stuff. The book is called Innocent Bystander. Murfy, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for having me.